In 1897, one small civilian ship outran the entire Royal Navy and humiliated the Admiralty in front of the world. At the Spithead Naval Review, celebrating Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, Britain's sea power was on display for foreign ambassadors and the press. The Royal Navy, the pride of an empire, lined the Solent with hundreds of grey hulls. Steam funnels smoked, brass fittings gleamed, and crowds filled the decks to witness what was meant to be a triumphant spectacle of order and dominance. Then, from the haze of the horizon, came a streak of white foam. A narrow, black-hulled vessel, no larger than a torpedo boat, sliced through the formation at unimaginable speed. Its wake glittered like a blade in sunlight as it tore straight past the mighty battleship Royal Sovereign. The admirals shouted for pursuit, but every ship that tried was left behind. The intruder zigzagged through the lines, vanished into the distance, and left the Navy's pride behind in disbelief. The crowd had witnessed the birth of a new kind of power. That little vessel was called the Turbinia, and the man who built it was not a sailor or an admiral, but an engineer, Sir Charles Parsons. Charles Algernon Parsons was born in 1854 into an Anglo-Irish scientific family. His father, the 3rd Earl of Ross, built the largest telescope on Earth. His home was filled with gears, optics, and experiments. Charles grew up among machinery and mathematics. After studying engineering at Trinity College, Dublin and Cambridge, he joined the great industrial firms of the age, working on dynamos and electrical systems. But Parsons was restless. He believed that steam engines were wasting most of their potential. In every piston stroke, most of the pressure and heat simply vanished into noise and friction. He wanted to make steam continuous, a smooth, rotating flow rather than a violent stop-start push. His answer was the steam turbine, a device that channeled high-pressure steam through rows of spinning blades, converting heat into motion with extraordinary efficiency. The idea wasn't new, but no one had made it work. The Admiralty thought it was impractical. Industry called it fanciful. So Parsons decided to prove them wrong with his own hands. To be honest, this story has always been one of my favourites in engineering. I actually studied mechanical engineering myself, and I've always had a real fascination with turbines. There's just something remarkable about how they turn steam into sheer power. In 1884, he founded the Parsons Marine Steam Turbine Company at Wallsend on the River Tyne. He designed his first turbine to generate electricity, and it succeeded, quietly producing power with far less fuel than a piston engine. Then he asked a question no one else dared. What if the same principle could drive ships? Naval engineers laughed. The turbine spun far too fast, they said. It would tear any propeller apart. Parsons ignored them. He spent his own fortune building a small experimental craft, light enough to carry a high-speed turbine and 3 propellers. He called it Turbinia. Early trials were disastrous. Cavitation shattered propellers. Vibrations nearly tore the hull apart. Parsons redesigned everything, blade shapes, gearing, and the shaft layout, until at last, in 1896, his creation glided across the Tyne at over 30 knots, faster than any ship in the Royal Navy. It was the fastest vessel on Earth, yet no one believed him. Without an official test, the Navy refused to attend his demonstrations. Parsons realised that if the establishment would not come to him, he would go to them, literally. At the Queen's Jubilee Review the following year, Parsons made his move. As the Royal Navy paraded for the monarch, he steered Turbinia straight into the line of warships. Officers were furious, but powerless. Their battleships lumbered behind as Turbinia sped between them like a wasp through a cage of giants. Every newspaper in Britain carried the story the next morning. The Admiralty could no longer ignore him. Within months, the Navy ordered its first turbine-powered destroyers. Within a decade, every major warship in the world used his system. The steam turbine had made piston engines obsolete, and the age of industrial power entered a new phase. Parsons had humiliated the Admiralty, but in doing so, he had handed them the future. What began as one man's defiance became a technological turning point. The same turbine design that made Turbinia unstoppable would soon drive the battleships of the dreadnought era, the great liners of the Atlantic, and the generators that electrified Britain. All from a concept born in a workshop in Newcastle, dismissed as impossible by those who thought progress had already reached its limit. Sir Charles Parsons had proved that science, not status, decides the pace of history, and by the time the Navy caught up, the world was already running on his invention. After the Spithead demonstration, the Admiralty could no longer ignore him. Yet official acceptance didn't come easily. Parsons had made them look foolish in front of the world, and naval pride was slow to forgive. Behind closed doors, committees argued that his turbine was too delicate, too expensive, too experimental for warships. They wanted proof on their own terms, and Parsons was determined to give it to them. He invited naval engineers to Newcastle to see his machinery in person. Inside his Wall's End works, they found a sight that silenced skepticism. Rows of polished steel rotors, perfectly balanced to the width of a human hair, spinning silently at thousands of revolutions per minute. His staff weren't craftsmen. They were precision specialists, trained to work at tolerances unheard of in the late Victorian age. Every blade, every bearing, every shaft reflected a kind of discipline that looked more like science than industry. The Admiralty reluctantly commissioned 2 experimental destroyers, HMS Viper and HMS Cobra, each fitted with Parsons' new turbine system. When sea trials began, they shattered every record the Navy held. Viper reached over 33 knots, Cobra only slightly less. Observers who once called turbines a toy for inventors now realised they were watching the future of propulsion. Although both ships were later lost to structural failures unrelated to their engines, the message was clear. The turbine worked and nothing else could match it. Within a few short years, every major shipbuilder in Britain was licensing Parsons' design. Merchant lines saw the same advantage the Navy did: more speed with less vibration, less noise and lower maintenance. The great transatlantic liners adopted turbines almost overnight. Ships like the Mauretania and Lusitania became the pride of Britain's merchant fleet, their engines built under Parsons' patents. The Mauretania, powered by his turbines, would hold the blue ribbon for the fastest Atlantic crossing for more than 2 decades. Parsons himself remained more engineer than businessman. He was far more interested in refining blade geometry and steam efficiency than in public relations. He spent endless hours in test rooms measuring minute pressure changes, chasing fractions of a percent in fuel savings. Each adjustment to blade angle or nozzle shape brought marginal gains, but multiplied across thousands of revolutions, they transformed performance. He understood, better than anyone, that progress came from precision, not publicity. By the first years of the 20th century, the turbine had conquered both war and commerce. What began as an experiment on the Tyne had become the beating heart of an empire's power. Parsons' invention now drove not only ships, but also electrical generators in power stations across Britain. The same principle that turned propellers also turned dynamos. The turbine had escaped the sea and entered every household through the light switch. His achievement was so transformative that it reshaped Britain's strategic outlook. The Navy could now deploy faster fleets, maintain greater endurance and sustain the vast logistical web of empire. Industrial Britain ran on steam, but thanks to Parsons, it now ran efficiently. He had turned energy itself into a weapon. By 1911, he was knighted for his services to engineering. For a man who began his career dismissed as eccentric, it was vindication. Yet, like most great innovators, Parsons took little comfort in honours. He continued to tinker, redesign, and refine, always convinced that perfection was a matter of numbers, not medals. The world was only beginning to understand how completely he had changed it. By the time the First World War broke out, Sir Charles Parsons' invention had become the backbone of British power. Every major warship that left the slipways at Portsmouth, Barrow or Belfast was turbine-driven. What began as a one-man rebellion on the River Tyne was now the defining standard of naval propulsion across the world. Britain's enemies and allies alike rushed to adopt the same design, copying what the Royal Navy had already perfected. The turbine transformed the shape of warfare. Ships could now steam for longer distances at higher speeds, without tearing themselves apart. Cruisers could patrol half the globe without maintenance stops. Battleships no longer rattled their own hulls to pieces at full speed. In a single generation, Parsons had taken the Navy from clanking piston engines to smooth, continuous power. The Royal Navy, and by extension the British Empire, became faster, quieter, and almost untouchable. But Parsons' contribution wasn't confined to war. The same turbine principle began driving civilian progress just as quickly. His company at Wallsend built generators for Britain's first large-scale power stations, feeding electricity into homes and factories. Cities lit by gas lamps a decade earlier were now glowing under electric light, produced by steam turbines designed by the same mind that had once shocked the Admiralty. In the early 1900s, his firm worked with shipbuilders like Cunard and White Star Line to install turbines in their newest liners. The results were spectacular. When RMS Mauretania launched in 1906 with Parsons turbines, she became the fastest ship on Earth. Her engines produced more than 70,000 horsepower, an unimaginable figure at the time, yet she ran smoothly enough for passengers to dine and dance even as she tore across the Atlantic at record speed. The newspapers called her the Turbine Triumph. For Parsons, it was proof that his invention had conquered both war and peace. From Newcastle to London, his name became synonymous with precision engineering. His workshops were models of industrial discipline, bright, orderly, and driven by mathematics. Parsons treated engineering as a science of measurement rather than mechanics. He often said that machines should be designed the way astronomers calculate the stars. Nothing left to guesswork, everything built upon numbers. The government soon realised that the same efficiency, which made his turbines perfect for warships, could also power Britain's factories. Contracts poured in for turbo generators, propulsion units, and marine systems. By 1914, the Parsons Marine Steam Turbine Company employed thousands and supplied equipment to every corner of the empire. From Singapore to Cape Town, every naval base, every port, every power station owed something to his designs. Yet, with recognition came imitation. Competitors in Germany, America, and France began producing their own versions. Parsons refused to be drawn into bitter patent wars. He was not a businessman by instinct. He was an inventor who cared more about progress than profit. He quietly shared technical data with colleagues abroad, believing that knowledge advanced civilization faster than secrecy ever could. His humility made him respected, even among rivals. When the First World War erupted, Parsons' turbines powered the fleet that kept the sea lanes open and the enemy blockaded. The Grand Fleet at Scapa Flow steamed into battle, propelled entirely by the invention once laughed out of the Admiralty's offices. At the Battle of Jutland in 1916, turbine-driven ships manoeuvred faster and held formation under fire, a mechanical advantage that saved lives and changed tactics. Parsons himself never saw combat, but his work turned engineering into a form of national defence. After the war, his focus shifted again, this time to pushing efficiency even further. He experimented with high-pressure turbines, geared drives, and new alloys that could withstand extreme temperatures. His designs found their way into power stations, textile mills, and even experimental aircraft. By the 1920s, the turbine had become the heart of modern industry. Steam, once seen as an outdated relic of the Victorian age, was now the invisible fuel of the 20th century. Despite his wealth and influence, Parsons remained remarkably modest. He was often seen walking through his factory floors, sleeves rolled up, talking directly to apprentices and machinists. He valued precision more than prestige. When a young engineer once asked him what made his turbines succeed, he simply replied, "We measured what others assumed." As the years passed, Britain's empire of steel and steam continued to expand, but Parsons was already thinking beyond his own lifetime. He invested heavily in research for smaller, faster turbines that could fit into vehicles, ships, and electrical plants of every size. He believed the turbine was not a single invention, but a principle, one that could power anything. By the 1930s, the turbine was no longer just an engineering triumph, it was civilization's heartbeat. From ocean liners to city lights, from battleships to textile looms, the rhythm of progress pulsed to the same mechanical spin first imagined by one quiet engineer on the Tyne. Sir Charles Parsons had not merely built an engine, he had built an empire of motion, one measured not in territory, but in revolutions per minute. By the 1930s, Sir Charles Parsons was regarded as one of the most important engineers in British history. His invention had transformed the Royal Navy, electrified the nation, and defined an entire era of mechanical progress. Yet, for all his success, he remained the same quiet, analytical man who had once built a boat with his own money just to prove a point. Titles, honours, and wealth meant little to him compared to the satisfaction of perfecting a design. He often said that invention was not about inspiration, but persistence, the willingness to fail, measure, and try again until the numbers told the truth. That belief became his trademark. While others saw industry as noise and spectacle, Parsons saw harmony. To him, a turbine was music in motion, every blade balanced, every rotation precise, every sound a confirmation that physics and craft were working together perfectly. Even in his later years, he spent most of his time in the workshop. He developed new types of high-pressure turbines, experimented with turbo generators for electricity networks, and designed propeller systems for ships that reduced vibration and fuel waste. He also turned his attention to optics, continuing the scientific tradition of his father, who had built the great telescope at Birr Castle. For Parsons, discovery was never finished. It simply changed form. His reputation reached far beyond Britain. Universities in Europe and America honoured him. Scientific societies awarded him medals and fellowships. But he disliked ceremonies. He preferred to walk the factory floor in his worn coat, talking to apprentices about balance, tolerance, and why good engineering always begins with curiosity. Those who met him described a man both brilliant and humble, more interested in ideas than in power. When the Second World War began, Parsons was already in his 80s, but his machines still powered the fleet that guarded Britain's shores. Every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship that steamed into the North Atlantic owed part of its design to him. Even the mighty aircraft carriers that projected power across the globe ran on turbines that could trace their ancestry directly to Turbinia. Parsons did not live to see the end of that war, but his legacy fought on long after him. He died in 1931, aged 76, leaving behind an empire powered not by conquest, but by motion. His funeral was modest, attended by engineers, sailors, and factory workers who understood what he had given them. The newspapers called him the man who made steam efficient. Historians would later call him the father of modern power, but perhaps his greatest tribute lies in something simpler, the fact that every time a turbine spins, in a ship, a generator, or a power plant, it carries his fingerprint. The world still runs on his principle of continuous energy, turning heat into motion with the same elegant efficiency he imagined nearly a century ago. In the decades that followed, Parsons' designs evolved into gas turbines and jet engines, technologies that would drive aircraft and shape the modern age. Without his groundwork, the leap from steam propulsion to jet propulsion might have taken decades longer. His methodical approach, measurement, precision, iteration, became the foundation of 20th century engineering. Today, few people outside the engineering world recognize his name, yet his influence is everywhere. From electricity grids to naval reactors, From cruise ships to power plants, the heartbeat of progress still echoes the rhythm of his invention. His legacy isn't measured in monuments or memorials, but in motion, the ceaseless turning of blades that keep the modern world alive. Sir Charles Parsons was more than an inventor. He was a thinker who refused to accept inefficiency, a craftsman who measured truth in revolutions per minute, and a visionary who believed that science should serve civilization, not vanity. He once wrote, "The object of all invention should be the elimination of waste, of energy, of time, and of human potential." In the end, he achieved exactly that. His turbines turned steam into strength, his principles turned chaos into order, and his legacy turned Britain into a nation powered by precision. Sir Charles Parsons, the engineer who made the Royal Navy unstoppable and the world immeasurably faster.